Professor Jean-Luc Marion. It's a great pleasure and honor to have you here in Kraków. I'm very happy that you can share with us some of your thoughts and your insights.
Thank you.
Yes, so I will start with a seemingly simple question. Why philosophy? What is philosophy for you today? And maybe why would one want to devote his life, his work to philosophy in time when scientific progress, technology is improving and philosophy seems superfluous or self-limiting? What do you think about philosophy in our time, for yourself, but also for people who would like to start studying philosophy?
Philosophy imposes itself to me without question. And I would dare to say that other human sciences, positivist sciences, seem to me a bit boring, limited, yes, boring. And philosophy is not boring. Philosophy has no limit, no presupposition, no special field. You have just to try to think freely, and there is no limit. And perhaps you can make more money doing something else, but borrowing money is not worth of my time.
Yes, so following this question, this not limited to anything, the characteristic of philosophy that is not boring, that is full of events, let's say, what is your, if it's possible, what is your definition of phenomenology? How could you describe it in a couple of sentences to find its essence, given that many philosophers have a different view on phenomenology, but what it is for you, phenomenology?
Phenomenology is a kind of philosophy, but with, I would say, a practical feature. Philosophy in the past, and mostly under the name of metaphysics, was a theoretical approach to the things. I mean by theoretical, bracketing the empirical determination of so-called subject, trying to deduce the essence of individual things from universal and a priori principles, archai, as the Greek used to say. And so it was a question of, I would say, deduction. The word was made famous by Kant. Deduction from the real word, the word of the things, from the principles. So it is an a priori, deductive, essentialist view of the world. Phenomenology, to some extent, is the exact reverse. It's why there is no definition, theoretical definition, very clear, no clear and univocal theoretical definition of phenomenology. Phenomenology is not about theoria, it's about description of the things. Starting with the things, not with the principles. Because things may appear without principles, without depending on the a priori determination of their essence. That is, things may appear without a clear openness to any essence, any definition. So, to describe the thing as they give themselves, I would say give themselves without being allowed by the principles to appear. What is needed is more than mere theoria. It is to achieve some operations. Husserl used to say that phenomenology is about acts. For instance, the act of intentionality. This is, that is to say, we don't see the image, the representation of the things. The classical problem, we know image, representation of the thing, how to connect them to the real things. Classical problem, skepticism and so on. And Husserl says, no, we are oriented towards the things themselves and not towards the representation of the thing. The representation is a consequence of our orientation, intentional orientation, toward the thing itself. Same thing about what phenomenology repeatedly call the reduction. What does that mean to make a reduction? That means that in the overall experience, I have a general overview of this hall and this room. The question is, what is really given to me? And it is not that easy to answer what is given to me, because many things are given in different ways. I could say what is given is the form of the bibliothèque, the books, the binding of the books, or I could say it is the system of the lights, or I could say, in fact, what is really given to me is the fact that we chat about philosophy. So I have to make a choice, and to describe what we are all about is not that easy. Is it the material set? Is it the personal disposition of a chair, the light, or what we say, or more precisely, the question about which we speak and because of which we met. All this is a question, so I can reduce what is given vaguely on what is really given. So this could be a showroom for people selling chair and table and things like that. It can be a presentation of books. It can be friends meeting to have a drink. It can be a philosophical class, and so on and so on. So the reduction is to decide what is at stake, and so on. So to have access to the things, you need to fulfill some acts. So I would say that phenomenology, to that extent, is a practical science, or in a more traditional way, Aristotle in the Nicomachean Ethics, book 6, speaks of the intellectual virtues. So it is an intellectual virtue, but it is virtue, it's practical. This is why it is a new style in philosophy. And last word about that, you can say, you can understand philosophy as metaphysics, a priori, or as phenomenology, roughly speaking, and it is an oversimplified view, a posteriori, and the difference between analytical philosophy and phenomenology is that analytical philosophy remains metaphysical, because it's about formal determination, principle, and so on.
That's why I imagine that the thing that is given can be unscheinbaren.
Yeah.
Because it's so intimate to us that we don't notice it to the bore.
No, exactly. That is, indeed, what does not appear is precisely what phenomenology take care of. Heidegger says in Being in Time, section 7, that phenomenology is required precisely where the things don't spontaneously appear. And the meaning of the thing, indeed, does not appear. A meaning does not appear. But phenomenology is interested in the non-appearing appearance of the things.
Yes. So phenomenology is in part linked with this other than metaphysics, this depassment or destitution of metaphysics. And I wanted to ask you about a topic that is now popular, and I would link it with this view that that fulfillment of metaphysics, as Heidegger put it, is a rule of objectifying of the world of science and technique, and the topic of artificial intelligence. Pope recently wrote an encyclical about it, putting this question in the center of Catholic social teaching today. Do you have some thoughts about what is so problematic in this way that our societies are starting to sort of depend on artificial intelligence? Do you have maybe some insights, some thoughts about this topic?
Well, what is problematic about artificial intelligence is not that it is artificial, because it is a long story which started centuries ago. That is, there is a possibility to think without thinking, in an artificial manner, with computing machine, and this started in 17th century, Pascal and many others after that, so it is not something new. So artificial thinking is not, for me, breaking new. No, what is new is that it is generally assumed by everyone that this is intelligence. And obviously it is not intelligence, because intelligence means much more than computing. You see, the so-called artificial intelligence requires to have a data center. And the data center should be as big as possible to improve the power of computing power. So it is about computing, and it is material, because you need power, precisely, and so on and so on. And it is not very ecological, after all, things like that. So it is material, and it is about computing. But intelligence is, Descartes has listed the modalities of cogitatio. The first is doubting. The so-called artificial intelligence is completely unable to doubt. Then it is to know by representation, and this includes computing, calculation, matrices universalis. Computers can do that. Then there is to decide, to will, to deny, to decide. The computer cannot do that. It is, for instance, the difficulty for artificial intelligence in in conducting a war. Yes. Who will take the decision to fire or not? Does the machine is qualified to do that? What does that mean for a machine to make a choice? Is it a choice or not? Possibly. So to will or will not is not obviously, at least not obviously, determination of the artificial intelligence. And then intelligence is also to imagine. What does that mean, to imagine? And to feel. And to feel means also to feel, when I feel sensation, for instance, by touching. When I feel not only the pen, but my flesh feeling the pen. When I touch, when I feel, I have a double feeling. So it is a self-perception. Well, does that mean that the computer could have a self-perception? That is, it cannot take in account neither pleasure nor pain, and so on. So a large part of the modes of the intelligence, widely understood, are absolutely closed to the artificial non-intelligence. What is very surprising is that the public, including the specialists and the political people and so on, admit without any question that artificial intelligence is the pattern, the achievement of intelligence. That is, the implicit message is, please try to think only according to the pattern of the computer. See, it is really frightening that there is a consensus so narrow-minded, stupid, in fact, consensus about that. I'm frightened by that, not by the artificial intelligence.
Yes, so it's not the artificial intelligence that is the problem, but our view of ourselves.
Yes.
And the reduction of language, exclusion of speech from language, because we call them large language models, but it's not a real human language.
Yes, and it is not large. It is very narrow model language. And the idea that to think is to make an exchange of data. To think is about information and data. Precisely, to think is about interpreting data, not about the data. So what is really, there is a blindness about what thought and thinking is, blindness and blindness which expand a kind of obscurity and shadow on human experience, and this is seen as light.
Yes. Okay, thank you. I would like to move to next question, and it is to understand you better as a philosopher, as author. I would like to ask you about your inspirations, but not the obvious one that one could find just reading your books and looking at the citations, but rather, let's say, more less obvious. For example, I would say that, like Ricoeur said, that by hermeneutics is a way to understand ourselves better by reading some book and sort of identifying myself with the fictional character also. So is there some work of art, poetry, film, literature, maybe some fictional character that helped you understand yourself better, thinking otherwise or writing otherwise? Do you have some inspiration like that you could share with us?
I think that I cannot answer that question at all. No, I was taught by experience, or rather by the interpretation of experience after the fact. And it is when you pray, when you are in love, when you do sport, that you experience the real world. And the difficulty is twofold. First, you have to make as broad experience as you can. What is painful in daily life is that the field of experience may be very narrow, and it is closed. We are enclosed in some walls, and mass media are the walls. Wall of pictures, screens, and we are prisoner, and in our field of experience is a little cell. So the first problem is to get out of the jail, and the media again are a jail. Because in the media, not only we experience the picture of the thing, not the things, and it is the same picture for all of us. And the second difficulty is to have the words to express what we possibly have experienced. And the fact that the level of linguistic skill, the decay of the level of linguistic skill, not only people know only one or two languages, and they have a rather poor vocabulary and so on. They have no reading experience of real literature and things like that. So the result is that we have too short in expressing what we have experienced. And so we, in fact, I feel like that, we are less educated than our father and grandfather. we are less. We have more information, but we are less educated. And we have no. We had greater poets in the past than now. At least in France, it is the case. I don't speak about Poland, but being a fellow of the French Academy, I'm led to read the production of the running production of novels and things like that a lot. I have to admit that it is very disappointing.
Okay. So first of all, a lived experience and the language and the experience of reading, but not the information in social media and so on, that helps us to understand and express it, I gather.
So in my case, so I have had some real experiences out of the jail, yes, time to time. Yes.
Well, I would like to still dig a little bit for those not obvious inspirations. For example, Givenness wrote that he will not cite Rosenzweig because he would have to cite him everywhere. If I remember correctly, in Totalité Infinie. So, do you have some philosophical inspiration, a philosopher that you don't cite often, but who accompany you in your thinking?
Yes. Yes. Very soon there was Wittgenstein, Kierkegaard, or Pascal. And you see, they are not really philosophers, mainstream philosophers. They are special characters. And this is the reason why they could inspire you to go to cross the border. Yeah. And but for me, the greatest opportunity to reach out to new regions of thinking was theology. When you study to become a professional philosopher, the history of philosophy, the philosophy as it is done in the state-owned universities, or private but lay universities, what is surprising is that how much of rationality is overlooked. There is a large part of poetry, literature, and theology, which is completely overlooked. And I made that experience very soon when I was a student at the École Normale, when I started to read, for instance, Urs von Balthasar. And I was thrilled when I compare the index nominum of the book of my master's at the Sorbonne and the index nominum in the books by Balthasar. The books by Balthasar, the index nominum was twice or three times longer than that. And I knew, I was aware at least of the names in the book of my Sorbonne masters, most of them, and reading Balthasar, half of them were completely unknown to me. Suddenly, I had a flash. How narrow the, I would say, classical education may be. So theology for me was really the exact reverse of the usual view. Right? Theology is closed in its field, and there is a wide world of culture. In my case, the wide world of culture was very, very narrow. It was a small discussion between ideologies and literary schools and things like that. And the real wide, the world wide open, the open sea was, for instance, poetry and theology. So I had this reverse impression.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let me ask a question about your path of thinking. If phenomenological reduction is an undertaking that, as you said, must be made but repeated, renewed, like a zigzag, you know, and Heidegger said that his philosophy is a path, you know, but also a path that sometimes leads to nowhere, like Holzwege, you know, and do you see in your own philosophical path concepts that you had to remake or revoke or deepen, something that you have to had to overcome, you know, just to get a sense of things that were a kind of struggle for you in a path to widen the phenomenology to as it is, let's say, an infinite endeavor, that there is always more of the given and the reduction must be remake, renewed, and sometimes overcome.
I would say, as in philosophy, I had rather an inclination to a cumulative use of the concept. I keep everything. But with some modification. To start with, one of my first intuition was about presence and absence. Presence and absence of God, presence and absence of the other. And I was educated that there is a difficulty in the philosophy of intersubjectivity, that is, the other we cannot reach the other as such. The other remains an enigma. And so there is always a distance. Sartre, Camus, Merleau-Ponty, and so on. And studying a bit of theology and Trinity and so on, I make the discovery that the cleft between the other and myself is not does not contradict the relation between us. It is the condition of possibility of the relation. And you discover this in Trinity, where precisely the distinction between the person is a condition of possibility of the communion. So you have to upset the alleged contradiction of difficulty to consider that this is the solution. And so I build up to express this, the concept of distance. The distance is precisely the fact that the distance is a way to unite and not to separate. But after that, you have to have a more sophisticated approach to the distance. So that moment, you need other concept. You need, for instance, intentionality. And there is no intentionality, that is, possibility for my consciousness to be outside of itself and to be, to some extent yet and from the beginning connected to the thing itself if the thing itself does not show up as itself by itself, which is givenness, and so on. So very often I had the impression to make some progress by first connecting some other concepts which were already there, but reinterpreting them, and very often what appears as the Aporia is in fact the solution to the Aporia. And so as long as you can develop this reorganization of different concepts which appear consistent together, you have impression, as in Spinoza, as long as you can make this kind of induction or deduction, you are on a safe path.
Yes, I think that we could speak about those things for hours and our viewers would not object, but out of respect for your time, let me ask two more questions. And I want to follow up on this question about Aporia, and where there is Aporia, there is also some way of Givenness that we can move forward with our thinking. And I am thinking about Heidegger, who I consider that he has a biggest influence on the phenomenology today. He did discover Givenness in his philosophy as Gibt, Gegebenheit. Why did he did not follow it? Why he was so cautious? Why did he was afraid? What is some dangerous in thinking the absolute givenness? So, what is your point of view on this sort of way of thinking of Heidegger and in his approach to givenness? Yeah.
It is one of my main questions. Heidegger is so clever. Yes. Time to time he was a bad guy, but he is a great, great philosopher. And he was klug enough to connect the question of appearing, manifestation of the phenomenon, to the question of givenness. By referring, and not only at the end, but as soon as the first seminars, and even in Being in Time, to Es gibt, which is translated, unfortunately, by there is in English, or precisely there is in Es gibt no is, and in French by il y a, which is very unfortunate as well, because in Es gibt there is no here, no là. Es ist beyond those determinations. The Es gibt is comes earlier as time, being, space, and everything. So Heidegger was close to the question of givenness. So why has he avoided this open road, and why has he concealed the Es gibt into the Ereignis? Heidegger says, das Sein verschwindet im Ereignis. Being disappears in Ereignis. Okay, correct. But in fact, we can say Heidegger has made the Es gibt disappear in Ereignis. And what is so important in the givenness Heidegger has explained that in Zeit und Being and in die ontologische Verfassung der Metaphysik. It is the fact that when es gibt the act of giving, in German, die Gebung, the act of giving disclose what is given, the given, the gift. That is, in German, die Gabe. And as noticed Heidegger, wisely, at the end of the process, we see only what is given, and the process of giving disappears.
It's like being and the ontologische difference, no?
Yeah. That is, and so it is not because we forgot the process. It's because the process made itself invisible for the sake of the result of the process. And so the giving process dies for the sake of the result of the giving process, which is a gift. So it is central. That is, manifestation is, the process of manifestation is always submitted, if I may say so, to something like an analogy of the kenosis. That is, we see the phenomena, and it is very difficult for us to guess what made those phenomena visible. What are they coming from? Because they are coming from the not yet visible, what I call the unseen, not the invisible, the not yet seen. What is that process? How could we have access to that process? That's the secret of phenomenality. And indeed, it is a new way, from a theoretical point of view, to understand creation. Creation is not fabrication of things by God, like craftsman working out, producing an object. It is displaying into the visible what was not yet seen before. And this process cannot appear, or rather it appears, but it appears in its result. The process itself cannot appear.
It does not enter the stage.
Yes, enter the stage, exactly. This is something which is shared by theologians and good philosophers to review the process behind the stage, which made visible what was previously unseen.
Well, I would love to deepen this topic, which is fascinating, but I would like to ask the last question, and I guess this is the question that you receive very often, the question about the relationship between philosophy and theology that you already mentioned in this last question. In our times, it is not a clear distinction, but there is still a distinction, and I would like to make it the question more specific, maybe to approach it from a specific angle. If we are on the common ground of, let's say, erotic phenomenon or the fact of Givenness, And we can approach this common ground from the theological or philosophical perspective from the point of view of believer and non-believer. Is it possible to, from the point of view of believer, to sort of see, let's say, the post-secular or anatheistic discourse as a sort of anonymous Christianity, as Ranner put it? I know that you are sort of skeptical on this point of view with Balthasar, this sort of, but is it, let's say, maybe a valid point of view to say, okay, we are talking about the same thing, but you are talking from the point of view of anatheistic or post-secular, we from the point of view of believer, but our faith is no longer a faith in metaphysical God, so we are sort of on the same ground. What do you think about this?
No, we are in the same world, in the same society, so we are on the same step. This is not the point. No, I would say two things. First, the distinction between philosophy, even phenomenology, and theology is not clear today, and it is a good thing, because the opposition was taken for granted because philosophy has claimed to be the unique owner, so to speak, of reason, and letting theology rule the field of faith, as they say. And this distinction, reason and faith, was to some extent agreed upon by both parties. Today we cannot say that anymore, because we don't know exactly what reason is. We have the suspicion that reason is much broader than what philosophy has done of it, and so on. And at the same moment, we try to enlarge the field of rationality by including many operations which for a long time were put on the side of faith, interpretation, imagination, and so on and so on. So the fact that rationality can expand only within a community, for instance. There is no abstract reason. There is rationality within a community of players, so to speak, and so on. So this opposition does not work anymore. Should we conclude that a non-believer is a potential anonymous Christian? No. No. I would say something different. The asset of theology consists in the fact that it allows a less narrow, broader field of experience that rationality without theology. I mean, a philosopher can experience rationality in different ways. You can be trained in mathematics, you have a kind of rationality. If you go to experimental physics or chemistry, you have another field of experience. And when you speak about reason, rationality in general, in fact, you refer to those fields of experience, rational experience. It is clear that especially someone especially in law or in painting or music has a new field for rationality, because there is rationality in painting, indeed. So theology is a new field. The objection is, there is no theology without assuming tradition, sacred texts, and so on. So this is not an open experience. No, it is an open experience. It is like to read a musical score is an open experience, although not everyone is able to do that. And read mathematical demonstration is it is an experience. Not all of us have access to that kind of experience. Same thing. So the Bible. So you can deny the Bible, okay, but you can also say this is those texts were written by people who were convinced that they have experienced something very special that deserves to be kept and told. So for them, it was an experience. If not, they would not have spent so much energy to make books out of that. So the result is that we have a possible experience of rationality, an additional one. And when a thinker have access to those different kinds of field of the rational experience, they can make progress in rationality. So it's the reason why theology is a very strong asset to expand rationality. And you are irrational, in philosophy is irrational when it cannot make sense with painting, with mathematics, with law, and with theology. So if you say, not only I have nothing to say about that, but nothing should be said about that, you are irrational. And at the end, you are defeated. The communist ideology was defeated because it was unable to take seriously something which in the real life was taken seriously by a lot of people. And the crisis of globalization is precisely the result of the fact that political life, economical life cannot have any account of what they call populism, which is a part of the real life of the people. And so they will be defeated. Not by populism, but by what is forbidden under the name of populism. So it's always the same thing. We need to have a large and experience of rationality.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Professor Marion, for your patience, your generosity in this talk. It was very enriching for us. So once more, thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you.